Okay, the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now backing up a little bit, remember that Captain Fritz and Police Chief Jesse Curry had talked about moving Oswald at 4 o'clock p.m. on the 23rd. But Fritz wanted more time because he wanted to try to get a confession out of Oswald. And so he took Oswald back in and asked him a lot of questions. I mean, and it was especially about the picture in which he was holding the rifle, and he just kind of went off the wall. He wouldn't admit anything. He said it wasn't his face. You know, that's my face, but that's not me. Somebody superimposed my face. And at that point, Fritz said, this guy has no grip of reality. I mean, he is in such denial, it's not worth it, so let's just make the preparation to transfer him. Now, when were they supposed to transfer him? Do you remember? I told you to put approximately 10 a.m. Because conspiracy theorists kind of go crazy over this, and I'll explain why. Okay? So let's talk about the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, we're talking about the 24th now of November 1963. Okay? 2 days after the assassination. At 9:30 a.m. that morning, Oswald was brought from his upper floor jail cell where he was staying back down to the 3rd floor. And he didn't have to go through any reporters when they brought him down that morning at 9:30. There wasn't a reporter on the 3rd floor. Where were they? They were in the basement because they wanted to watch the transfer because they told him it was going to be approximately 10 o'clock. So all the media moved their station, so to speak, from the 3rd floor where they had been for the last 48 hours down to the basement waiting for the transfer. Okay? Now, Fritz takes Oswald back to his office one more time. He wants to try to get this confession. And he figures he's got about 30 minutes or so to do it. So again, Fritz takes Oswald, brings him down to the 3rd floor interrogation room, and this time with Fritz is a guy by the name of Harry Holmes, who's the postal inspector for Dallas. Okay, Harry Holmes, I think he's on your ID sheet. Okay, so with Fritz talking to Oswald is Harry Holmes, and he's the postal inspector for Dallas. Now, why would Holmes be there? Why would the postal inspector be there? Okay, because Holmes is concerned because really Oswald violated federal postal regulations when he used an alias tied to that box number. You can't do that. And so Fritz was thinking, if I get Holmes down here and get a little pressure maybe on that, you never know, let's try to get one more effort to try to get something done here. Well, as Oswald gets down to Fritz's office and Holmes is sitting there, the first question Fritz asks him that morning is, Lee, did you shoot the president? Right off the bat, he asks him again, Lee, did you shoot the president? And Oswald simply answered, no. He asked him then if he shot Officer Tippit. Again, Oswald denied shooting anyone. The third question he asked him kind of goes back to the first interrogation. He then asked him, Lee, have you ever been to Mexico City? Remember when Hosty asked him that question? And actually, Oswald admitted that he had been there at that point. Would he admit that to Hosty? No, he told Hosty he'd been to Mexico. Remember? Well, he told Fritz that he indeed had been to Mexico City. And Fritz asked him, well, you know, obviously, what were you doing there? And he said that he went to both the Cuban and Soviet embassies and tried to get a visa to visit both countries. And we'll talk more about Oswald later and what he was doing in another test material. So Fritz asked him, have you ever been to Mexico City? And Oswald admitted that he had. And when Fritz asked him, what did you do there? He said, I went to both the Cuban and Russian embassies and tried to get a visa to leave. If he could have got a visa that day to go to either Cuba or to Russia, he would have gone. Okay? Now, he was living in New Orleans when he did this, which is a whole nother story that we'll tell you later, because this guy is an interesting dude. Okay? So, I want you to think about that, maybe put a little asterisk by or something, because we're going to come back to that, because when I tell you what I think Oswald was doing, this will kind of come into play. So he did admit to going to Mexico City, going to the Cuban embassy, asking for a visa to go to their country. They denied it. Went to the Russian embassy, asked for a visa to visit their country. They denied it. Now, did he meet the Soviet assassin? You know, we don't know. He didn't say anything about that to Fritz. Okay? Holmes then stepped into the conversation, and he asked Oswald about this name of Heidel. And he wondered, did anybody by the name of Heidel ever get mail at your mailbox? So Holmes steps in, and he asks Oswald about this Heidel, A.J. Heidel. He said, did this A.J. Heidel ever get mail at your post office box? And Oswald's response to that was, no, not that I'm aware of. Well, this A.J. Heidel doesn't even exist. But Holmes is trying to kind of get something out of him. So again, Holmes asked Oswald if this A.J. Heidel ever had gotten mailed at Oswald's mailbox. And Oswald's response was, no, not that I'm aware of. Well, then Holmes takes out the ID card that they had gotten out of his wallet that Fritz had, and he shows it to Oswald, and he says, how do you explain this? And Oswald's response is, I don't. That was his response. Okay? So Holmes takes out that ID card that said A.J. Heidel that they took from his wallet the very minute he was in the police car. And he said, how do you explain this? Oswald's direct response was, I don't. Well, at this point, Captain Fritz again says, well, let's transfer. Okay? So Fritz tells Oswald, it's gotten a little chilly, and wonders if he wants to go get a sweater to wear, because it is a little chilly in November. So Fritz is a kind man. And he says to Oswald, Lee, it's a little chilly, do you want to go get a sweater? Oswald agrees. Some of his clothes are brought down to Captain Fritz's office, when Oswald picks out a black sweater to wear for the transfer. Okay? If you end up looking at our picture, you'll distinctly see that black sweater in the picture. So Fritz asks him if he wants to go get us, something to wear. It's supposed to be a little cold. They bring some clothes down from his cell down to the third floor, and Oswald picks out a black sweater. Now, here are the two given reasons at the time why they were moving Oswald from the city jail to the county jail. I think I mentioned them yesterday, but I want to make sure you get them. Okay? Now, what was the first reason? Anybody remember what I told you? What were they getting tired of there?
The press.
The press. So the first reason given basically was they were going to move Oswald to the county jail so they could get away from the chaos of the media at the city jail. Okay? The media is not going to follow him to the county jail. Once he's filed out and put in jail, he's not going to be paraded back and forth where the media can see him. He's going to be in jail. And they're not going to let him, let the media in there. So the first reason why they were moving him was to just kind of get the media, the chaos of the media out of the picture. The second reason is they felt he would be safer and more secure in the county jail than they would have in the city jail. Okay? He would be more secure. Those were the two reasons. Another thing that came about just procedure-wise, as I told you yesterday, once a person's filed on and awaiting, trial, they moved him from the city to the county jail. That's where they housed those people. Now, the city jail is downtown. Ironically, the county jail is in Dealey Plaza and was the building that the limousine went by when Mrs. Connolly looked at the president and said, Mr. President, you can't say that Dallas doesn't love you. It's the top of the Dallas County Courthouse was the county jail, the top of that. So if you remember that building we've seen, that's where he was going to be transferred to. Okay? Now, they were going to move him by armored car from the city jail to the county jail because they thought it would be safer. So they're going to back an armored car down this ramp. You'd have to be there, but basically street levels here. Pay attention to street level, and the basement is where they're going to take him down the elevator to the basement, move him out of the elevator into the basement area, and put him in this armored car, which they were going to drop back down the ramp. So they're in the basement. That's where he's going to. So it's above street level. Okay. Now, according to Police Detective Jim Lavelle, this fella right here, according to Jim Lavelle, the police department had received numerous threats prior to the transfer, threatening to either capture or kill Oswald. They got phone calls at the Dallas Police Department from people anonymously saying they were either going to try to capture or kill Oswald. So that was the reason why they were going to transfer him in an armored car, okay? Jim Lavelle is a police detective that worked for the Dallas Police Department, okay? He's a police detective. So Oswald had been threatened in the, the hours prior to the transfer. Now, just a kind of side note, most of the officers, including Jim Lavelle, really thought they should transfer him in the middle of the night for his safety. To be most safe, they thought he should go in the middle of the night, either the night of the 23rd or the night of the 24th. They wanted him to go at night, okay? Why didn't they do that? Why didn't Police Chief Curry, who really was responsible for the transfer, why did he not take their advice and do it in the middle of the night?
Because Johnson wanted it to be
Close. The media wants to see Oswald again. They want to broadcast this transfer. So Police Chief Curry was getting just enormous pressure from the media to display Oswald for the whole world to see. At live TV, they were going to transfer the assassin of the president. Okay? So Curry decided that he would allow the press to witness it, and obviously in the morning of the 24th would be much more convenient for the press than it would have been in the middle of the night. Okay? So, again, the media was told, like everybody else, that the transfer would be about or approximately 10 a.m. So they were down there a while, okay? Because at 11:19 a.m. is when police officers arrived at Captain Fritz's office at the city jail. So the extra interrogation that Captain Fritz did took longer than anticipated, and so they never went and got Oswald till 11:19 a.m. So they're already an hour and 19 minutes later than the approximate 10 a.m. And that's important to understand when we get into Ruby and what, we'll get into that and all this stuff. It's just an important thing to know as far as conspiracy theorists, what they use. Okay? So basically what they did is they went and got Oswald from the third floor interrogation room. They put him in the elevator, and they were going to take him down to the basement. There would be a short walk from where the elevator opened to where this armored car was going to be, where they were going to put him in and take him to the county jail. Okay? So they arrived up at Fritz's office at 11:19 a.m. At 11:21 a.m., just 2 minutes later, Captain Fritz told Detective Jim Lavelle to handcuff himself to Oswald for the transfer. So as they got up to Fritz's office, Captain Fritz says to Jim Lavelle, "Detective Lavelle, would you please handcuff yourself to Oswald and escort the prisoner?" Now Jim Lavelle was 43 years old at that time. He's now 94. But he was 43 years old at the time this occurred. Okay? Now, Jim Lavelle's a very good friend of mine. I've talked to him many times, so the rest of this information I'm going to give you from this point on till the shooting is what Jim told me personally. It didn't come out of a textbook. Didn't come out of the history novels. It came right out of Jim Lavelle's mouth. Now, according to Jim, Oswald was very cordial. Okay? He said, "Is it okay if I put on my black sweater?" They said, "Sure," because he went and got it for him, so he put his sweater on. And as Lavelle started to escort Lee Oswald from the third floor, he said to Lee, quote, "Lee, if anyone shoots at you, I hope they're as good a shot as you were." Jim's kind of an interesting guy. You'll get a chance to talk to him, maybe, depending on how he's feeling. But he just was kind of joking with him. He's very cordial. He basically said, "Hey, Lee, if anyone shoots at you, I hope they're as good a shot as you were." Now, Lee's never admitted to anything, right, about shooting anybody, right? Well, Oswald kind of chuckled, and he told Lavelle, he said, no one's going to shoot at me. You're just quit being melodramatic. That's what Oswald kind of said to Lavelle. And they were having a pretty cordial conversation. So, again, Oswald responds by kind of chuckling and saying, "Hey, nobody's going to shoot at me. Quit being so melodramatic." Well, nevertheless, Lavelle reminded Oswald on what to do if he was shot at, because they thought he might be. I mean, they had gotten all kinds of threats. And when Jim kind of reminded him what to do if there was somebody after him, Oswald responded by saying, "I will just follow you." And Lavelle's response was to Oswald, "Well, in that case, you'll be on the ground." Because they're kind of talking about this as they're moving, okay? So again, Oswald tells Lavelle not to be melodramatic. Jim Lavelle again reminds him though, you know what to do now if somebody does threaten us or try to shoot at you. And he goes, and Oswald said, I'll just follow you. And Jim said, well, in that case, you'll be on the ground. Well, when the elevator reached the basement and opened, the area was just packed full of media and reporters, just packed full, okay? This was going to be broadcast live on television, and we'll talk about this, but they're preparing to bury the president too, so what the TVs are doing, they're flashing back to Washington, then they're flashing back to Dallas, then they're flashing back to Washington, okay? The president was buried on the 25th, but the preparations and everything was being, broadcast by the media there, so it was just kind of a weird day, and you'll get to see some of this, and they're just kind of going back and forth. What's that? Well, no, they were just transferring back, like CBS was just transferring back. So the people, if you were at home watching the TV, you were seen in Washington, then they would move you to Dallas. Then they'd move you to Washington, then they'd move you to Dallas. Well, basically what happened is all those people are down there, and Lee Harvey Oswald is getting ready to come out. Well, remember that armored car that they were supposed to back down there? Well, they started to back it down, and there was a big air conditioning duct that was in the ramp area, the drive down, and the armored car couldn't get down. It was hitting the air conditioning duct. So they pulled it out, and they brought in Captain Fritz's personal unmarked police car and backed it down to take it, okay? So again, they tried to get that armored car down, and as it was too tall, as they brought it down that ramp, and I've been down that ramp, the ceiling's not very high. There was a big air conditioning duct, and it wouldn't allow the armored car to go down, so they pulled it out, which is a key thing. I want you to remember about, they pulled it out, and then they brought Captain Fritz's car. That was the plan, okay? Any questions on the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald? Okay, we'll move to the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald. And you'll get a chance to see this on tape if we haven't already. I can't remember, we've seen a lot of things. But anyway, as Oswald moved past reporters towards that waiting car, a man suddenly passes between the newsmen at the edge of the crowd, extends his right arm with a .38 caliber revolver in it, sticks it in Oswald's torso and pulls the trigger. And you can see the picture right back there. That's the instant in which he is shot right back there. So they're just bringing him in, and you'll see this on tape. And they're bringing him in, and here one of the reporters yells, "Here he comes!" And all of a sudden, from Oswald's left comes this guy with this hat. He just sticks that .38 caliber pistol right in his torso and pulls the trigger. One shot into his torso. Now, according to reports, he actually tried to fire a second shot, but Officer L.C. Graves, who was on the other side of Lavelle, grabbed the pistol and prevented him from firing it. So he actually tried to get off a second shot, but police officer L.C. Graves grabbed the pistol and prevented the gun from firing. And again, Graves was standing to Oswald's left on the other side of Lavelle. And the guy in the white suit there at the tie looking at the shot is Jim Lavelle. Okay, so Graves was actually on the other side. Now, got a little something for you here. So we can put after we write that down, we can put our pens down and we can kind of see this. What I'm handing you is a Pulitzer Prize winning photograph. We'll read it together here. Okay, now let's read this together here. You can see obviously the shot that's back on the wall back there. Okay? You might have an extra one and I'll just get it from you, Taryn. It says, here we go, Bob Jackson, photographer for the Dallas Times-Herald, is dead tired as he waits in the basement of the city jail for Lee Harvey Oswald to be brought out. Only 47 hours earlier, he had been sitting in the back of a convertible behind President Kennedy's motorcade. He heard 3 shots, looked up at where they were coming from, and saw the rifle being drawn back into the window. He has not slept much since. Now they are moving Oswald from the city jail to the county jail, from one end of the town to the other. It is a normal procedure. They feel he will be safer there. Also, they are under pressure from the networks to allow Oswald to be televised. They want a picture of this guy. Everyone wants to see him. It's the biggest news story going, and it's live. An anonymous telephone call to the FBI at 2:15 a.m. the night before warned that Oswald would be killed during the transfer from the city lockup to the county jail. The FBI immediately relayed the warning to both city and county police. Later, the city police dispatcher said that call never came in. Bob Jackson's quote, "I had seen Ruby once. He came up to the photo department at the paper and brought one of his strippers up there who danced with a snake. He was getting publicity for her. Ruby loved the police. He owned a striptease club, and he always wanted to keep on their good side. He would go up to the police station late at night, bring them sandwiches, hang around like a buddy." As Bob is waiting with the other newsmen and camera crews, they announce that Oswald is being brought down. In the air was the feeling that something could happen. When Oswald came out the door, I raised the camera to my eye. People yelled out, "Here he comes!" I was ready. We stood in a semicircle about 11 feet in front of the door, which formed a little clearing. I was leaning against the fender of a police car. As I looked through my camera, Oswald took 8 or 10 steps, and I saw a body moving into my line of sight. I leaned over the car to the left. Ruby moved 3 quick steps and bang. When he shot, I shot. History turns on crucial moments, and Jackson's photograph freezes this one. It records the instant the bullet enters Oswald's body. His face contorts as he clutches his chest. The bullet fired by a man who wasn't supposed to be there, and millions of Americans watch it happen live, sitting in their living rooms. That was a remarkable thing about it. Okay, Pulitzer Prize winning photograph. Now here's a story for you. Here's Bob Jackson. There's the photograph up at the top there that Jim Lavelle signed for me. But there's a signature of Bob Jackson who took the picture. Now I was in Roberts, Montana as a superintendent teaching this class. And a young reporter that started working for the Red Lodge paper, the Carbon County News, came over one day and was looking at my stuff, and he says, "You know, I know Bob Jackson. My father was a good friend of his." I said, "You do?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I talk to him once in a while." I said, "Boy, if you could get a signature for me, that'd be awesome." Well, there you go. And he brought that back, and he wrote a letter to Bob Jackson, and Bob Jackson sent him that older photo and signed it for me, so that's where I got that. Okay, well, let's continue on here with this. Okay, during the assassination, Dallas newsman Bob Huffaker reported back to the news station the events of that historic moment. And when I show you videos of this, you'll clearly see Huffaker in all the news footage in the aftermath. You'll see him talking. He's one that really got on TV after it happened. Okay, Bob Huffaker. I just happen to have a signature of his too. Here's Bob Huffaker right here, and here's his signature. But you'll see when I show you the video, when it all gets done, he's the one kind of in front of the camera being broadcast that tells the events, and he's out of breath and all that. So during this televised assassination, a Dallas newsman by the name of Bob Huffaker reported back to the news station the events of the moment, and again, you can clearly see him in all the videos that I'll show you on this, and you'll see it in the next few days. Okay? So that takes us to our next subtopic then, which is another trip to Parkland Hospital. Another trip to Parkland Hospital. Now you saw some of the acting footage of this when we watched the movie Parkland. Do you remember? Okay? I'm going to see if you noticed something. Well, anyway, when you talk about this assassination, Oswald was shot in the stomach about 2 inches above and to the left of his navel. So right in this area is where he was shot. Okay, about 2 inches above his belly button and to the left. Okay? One shot, 2 inches above and to the left of his navel. Now, unfortunately for Oswald, the bullet went through his stomach, and I'll repeat this, hit a major artery, traveled through his liver, hit his 7th rib, and lodged, believe it or not, in his skin in the back right here. It was actually lodged in the skin. It went all the way through, and all that was keeping it in his body was the skin. Okay? So the bullet went through Oswald's stomach, and on the way through his stomach it hit a major artery, or after it went through, I'm sorry, hit a major artery, traveled right through his liver, banged off his 7th rib, and ended up, like I said, the only reason it was still in his body back here is because it hadn't broke through the skin in the back. Okay? So the bullet went through Oswald's stomach, hit a major artery, traveled through his liver, hit his 7th rib, and was lodged just in his skin on the other side of his body. Well, the ironic thing about this is, at the time that Oswald was shot, Fritz's car had not made it all the way down yet. It was on its way, but they immediately pulled it out, and what they pull in now? An ambulance. Okay? So the personal call of Captain Fritz had not made it all the way down to the basement yet, so it was quickly replaced by an ambulance. And you'll see in this video footage that I show you that they're going to load him into the ambulance and rush him, again, ironically, to Parkland Hospital. Now, when he arrives at Parkland Hospital, the doctor that first sees him, again, is Dr. Robert McClellan. Dr. Robert McClellan is the doctor that sees Oswald. And he later described Oswald as, quote, white as a piece of paper when he saw him. So according to Dr. Robert McClellan, after Oswald arrives at Parkland Hospital, he said he was, quote, as white as a piece of paper. Secret Service agents were there, machine guns drawn. They don't know what's happening. And they put an agent right next to Oswald, right next to him. Because what did they want to get? A deathbed confession. So they put a Secret Service agent right by the guy the whole time, in case they could get a deathbed confession out of him. Never did. He couldn't speak. Wasn't conscious enough to speak. But they put a Secret Service agent right next to Oswald, trying to get a deathbed confession. Well, this is kind of conjecture, but they kind of alluded to it in the movie Parkland, if you remember. It's insinuated that Oswald, when they brought him in, pushed him towards Trauma Room 1, where the president was treated, and nurses redirected him to Trauma Room 2. And if you kind of looked at that video, they insinuated that in the video Parkland also, because Doris Nelson, the lady that played Doris Nelson in the movie, said, no, remember, they took him to a different room. So he was actually taken to Trauma Room 2. It's insinuated they were going to put him in the same one as the president, but the nurse said no and took him to a different one. Okay? Well, here's the same people, these poor buggers, Dr. Ronald Jones, Malcolm Perry, Robert McClellan, are the ones that are going to operate on Oswald and try to save his life. Same guys that just witnessed the brutal assassination of the president 48 hours earlier are now trying to save the assassin's life. Ronald Jones, Malcolm Perry, and Robert McClellan. Again, all three on the board there. So in Trauma Room 2, Dr. Ron Jones, Malcolm Perry, and Robert McClellan operate on Oswald for over an hour, trying to save his life. They had to give him 16 pints of blood during that time. How many do you have in your body? 8? I think it's 8. I'm not a science guy, but I think you have 8. Well, they administered 16 pints of blood to him during this surgery. And finally, his heart just arrested. Began to have a heart attack. Okay? So as they're trying to save his life and operate, they end up administering 16 pints of blood during this procedure, and finally his heart arrests. So they begin cardiac massage, and they can see it isn't going to happen. This is kind of interesting. The only reason I know this, and the only reason you're going to know it, is because Jim Lavelle told me this personally. Lavelle accompanied Oswald to Parkland Hospital, and as he was standing there watching this, he could see the bullet under Oswald's skin in the back. And he told one of the doctors he had to have that bullet for evidence. Okay? So, as a result of that, the doctor took his scalpel. Basically, as Jim explained, it was like splitting a grape. He just took his fingers there, got that bullet, and just hit it with the scalpel, and it popped out like you were splitting a grape. And he handed the bullet to Lavelle, and Lavelle handed it to a nurse that was standing by him and asked her to do what?
Wash it.
And?
Put it in a bag.
What? Do what? Well, yeah, but before all that, put her initials on it. Remember, that's what they did in those days. So Lavelle handed the bullet to a nurse that was standing there, told her to clean it up, put her initial, put it in a bag, and put her initials in it to prove its authenticity. Well, they work on Oswald, like I said, they work on him, and finally at 1:07 p.m. on November 24th, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald is officially pronounced dead. 48 hours and 7 minutes after President Kennedy. Who would have thunk it? Okay, after treatment by doctors at Parkland, at 1:07 p.m. on November 24th, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was officially pronounced dead. 48 hours and 7 minutes after the president. In a room from maybe here to that door apart. Pretty interesting. Okay, we'll finish up today with starting to talk to you about the role of Jack Ruby in the shooting of Oswald. I'm not going to get into the whole thing. We'll finish it Monday, but I want to give you an introduction, and then I'm going to give you your raffle tickets, and we're going to talk about that. So the role of Jack Ruby in the shooting of Oswald. Now, we all know the man who shot Oswald in the Dallas City jail basement was Jack Ruby. I think we're pretty familiar with the fact that he was an owner of a local nightclub and strip joint in downtown Dallas, right? Everybody's aware of that, correct? But what happened to him immediately after he shot Oswald? I'll give you some of that information, okay? He actually was taken immediately to the county jail. Why wasn't he taken to the city jail for interrogation? Because there was no question he shot him. Everybody saw him, right? Different than Oswald, there wasn't going to be a bunch of interrogation at the city jail because he was, everybody watched him do it. So they took him to the county jail, put him in jail, and he was going to stay there basically until trial came. They would file on him there. It was not too much question. Well, I want to back up just a little bit and make a point here, and then we're going to quit. On November 22nd, 1963, before the shooting in Daley Plaza, Jack Ruby was in the offices of the Dallas Morning News. Okay? And you don't have to write. Let's not write this down. Let's just listen, because it won't be on the test. But I want you to get, because this is kind of interesting. Okay? Now, what do you think he was doing there?
Hanging out.
Well, he was placing ads for his two nightclubs. He owned the Carousel Club and he owned the Vegas Club. And he was basically just putting ads in the paper for his club. And when he was reading the paper that day, he came across this. That was in the paper. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy to Dallas. Remember we talked about that? And as he looked at it and read it, he saw that the American Fact-Finding Committee was the people that sponsored this particular ad. And then he looked down to see who the chairman of that committee was, and it was Bernard Wiseman. And this is on your ID sheet, but I just want you to listen. Bernard Wiseman. Well, Ruby listened to that name, and he thought to himself, that sounds Jewish to me. Okay? It was Jewish sounding, which would reflect badly on what? The Jewish community in Dallas. Okay? He was Jewish. And he changed his name from Jack Rubenstein to Jack Ruby because he didn't want to be known as a person that was Jewish, because people were discriminated against that were Jewish. So he's in that office kind of upset that morning, and upset in general that maybe a Jewish person put that disgusting ad criticizing the president, because he liked the president, okay? And his reaction to the president's assassination was he was silent, shaken, and ashen, according to people that were around him. He liked the president, okay? And part of his motives to shoot Ruby, according to even him and his brother, is he did it out of respect for Mrs. Kennedy. So we'll talk about that. Any questions? Now, when we go Monday, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him, and I'm going to tell you how he got down.